I still remember the way my father smiled that night, his hand resting firmly on my younger brother's shoulder. It was the kind of smile that said, "This is already decided." The dining room was filled with the soft clinking of glasses, hushed conversations between business partners and family members, the hum of a celebration that felt like a funeral to me. My funeral. I had worked 12 years, 12 long years, to build Carter Enterprises from a struggling logistics firm into a multi-million-dollar empire. My entire adult life had been dedicated to this company. The late nights, the sacrifices, the deals I fought tooth and nail to close. I had turned my father's dream into something greater than he had ever envisioned, and tonight, I respect, maybe even the words I had longed to hear all my life. "You've earned this." Instead, my father lifted his glass and spoke the words that shattered everything. "Eric will take over as CEO." For a moment, the world around me blurred. The sound of laughter, the cheers of congratulations, the polite murmurs of approval. It all became a distant echo as my heartbeat thundered in my ears. My stomach clenched, as if I had been punched, but I kept my face unreadable. I had spent years mastering that skill. No emotion, no weakness. Across the table, my brother smirked. It was quick, a flicker of victory, one he thought no one would notice. But I saw it, and in that moment, I realized the truth. This wasn't just my father's decision. Eric had orchestrated this. He had never cared about the company, never spent a single sleepless night worrying about contracts, never fought to keep it alive when times were tough. He was a trust fund prince who spent years hopping from one failed business to another, cushioned by our father's money, and now he was being handed everything I built. I felt my mother's eyes on me from across the table, her expression unreadable. She understood. She always understood. But she wouldn't interfere. She never did. My father had spoken, and in his mind, his word was final. I reached for my wine glass, steadying my hand before lifting it. My lips curved into a smile so perfect, so convincing, that even I almost believed it. "To Eric," I said smoothly, raising my glass. The room echoed my toast, glasses clinking together in celebration. Eric nodded, as if this was a burden he was prepared to bear. I almost laughed. They thought I would step aside. They thought I would accept this betrayal. They had no idea what was coming. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's proud smile, his hand on Eric's shoulder as if he were handing him the crown of a kingdom I had built with my own hands. I saw the way Eric smirked, the way he lowered his gaze in fake humility, already drunk on the power he had yet to wield. The rage burned in my chest, hot and unrelenting, but beneath it was something colder, calculated. I wasn't going to accept this. Not now, not ever. By 3 a.m., I was sitting in my home office, my laptop glowing in the darkness. 12 years of my life had gone into Carter Enterprises, and they thought I would just walk away? No, they had no idea how deep my roots ran. They had no idea that while my father had held the title, I had secured the real power. I opened the confidential folders I had been collecting for years. Every contract, every share agreement, every executive decision that had ever required my approval. Eric thought he was about to step into an easy transition, that by next week, his name would be on the office door, his new title confirmed. He didn't know that he was stepping onto a battlefield. I clicked on the file labeled Executive Shareholders Agreement. My heart pounded as I read over the words I had long memorized, but seeing them now felt different. This was my weapon. My father, for all his business acumen, had overlooked something critical. In his obsession with legacy and bloodline, he had failed to realize the technicalities of power. I was the majority shareholder. Years ago, when Carter Enterprises faced financial trouble, I had invested my own money, earning an additional 15% stake. When we expanded operations, I took another 10%, and when legal disputes nearly crippled the company, my father had unknowingly signed over another 10% to me in exchange for my help navigating the crisis. That gave me 60%. My father and Eric, together, they barely controlled 40%. I let out a slow breath, my fingers tightening into fists. They had made their move, now it was my turn. At exactly 8:45 a.m., I stepped into Carter Enterprises headquarters like I had every day for over a decade, but today, everything was different. The whispers had already begun. Employees avoided my gaze, their uncertainty hanging thick in the air. They knew. News of my father's announcement had spread like wildfire. Some looked at me with sympathy, others with hesitation, as if unsure whether I was still someone worth aligning with. They would know soon enough. I walked straight to my office, shutting the door behind me. I had 15 minutes before my father and Eric arrived, thinking they were about to take control. 15 minutes before their entire plan unraveled. I powered on my computer, pulling up the executive agreement. I had already prepared everything, the legal filings, the notifications to the board, the memorandum outlining the true structure of the company. All I had to do now was wait. Right on schedule, there was a sharp knock at my door. I didn't answer. The door swung open, and my father strode in like a king taking his throne. Eric followed behind him, his posture exuding false confidence. He was dressed the part, a sleek navy suit, a Rolex glinting on his wrist. He looked like someone who believed he was about to run a company. He had no idea what was coming. "Madeline," my father said, his tone firm, already expecting compliance. "I assume you're ready to begin the transition." I leaned back in my chair, meeting his gaze with carefully measured indifference. "Transition?" He frowned as if I was being deliberately obtuse. "Yes, Eric will be taking over as CEO. You'll help with the handover, of course. Get him familiar with operations before you step aside." I arched a brow. "Step aside?" Eric smirked. "No hard feelings, Maddie," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "It's just business." "Ah." I smiled then, a slow, deliberate smile that made the color drain from his face. "Funny," I said, reaching for the remote on my desk. I was about to say the same thing. I pressed a button, and the large screen behind me lit up with the executive shareholders agreement. My father's expression barely changed, but Eric paled. I turned to him, my voice deceptively casual. "Tell me, Eric, do you even know what this document is?" His jaw tightened. "A shareholders agreement." I nodded. "And do you know what it says?" Silence. I tapped the screen, highlighting a crucial clause. "It states that any transfer of executive power requires the approval of all majority shareholders." I let that sink in before delivering the final blow. "And I, Dad, hold 60% of the company's shares." The silence that followed was suffocating. Eric's face twisted in disbelief, then rage. "You're lying." I slid a second document across the desk. "This is the latest legal filing. Feel free to verify it." Eric snatched it up, scanning the contents, his hands shaking as he realized the truth. He turned to our father, desperate. "Dad, do something!" But my father remained silent. Because he knew. He knew I had legally outmaneuvered him, and there was nothing he could do. I exhaled slowly, standing up. "I'm not firing you, Eric," I said. "I wouldn't want to force you into the real job market." His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. "You will report to me. You will work under my leadership. Otherwise," I gestured toward the door, "you're free to leave." Eric looked at our father, but this time my father had no answer, no solution, no last-minute rescue. Because this wasn't his company anymore. It was mine. The weight of the moment settled over the room, thick with tension and unspoken words. My father finally spoke, his voice quieter than I had ever heard it. "You've changed," he said. I met his gaze. "No, Dad, I just finally stopped pretending." And with that, the war had begun. The air in my office was suffocating, thick with tension and disbelief. My father sat in silence, his eyes locked on the shareholders' agreement I had just displayed, while my brother Eric paced the room like a caged animal. His hands were balled into fists, his face red with fury. He looked at me as if he wanted to strangle me, but all he could do was sputter in disbelief. "This isn't over," Eric spat, slamming his fist against the polished wood of my desk. I leaned back in my chair, the picture of calm, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "Oh? And what exactly do you plan to do, Eric?" "You think you can just steal this from me?" he seethed, jabbing a finger toward me. "You think this company is yours?" I chuckled softly, shaking my head. Steal? No, Eric, this was never yours to begin with. You just assumed that because Dad was willing to hand it to you on a silver platter, it was yours for the taking. I folded my hands neatly on the desk. But you forgot one very important thing. I built this company. Eric turned to our father, desperation creeping into his voice. Dad, say something. You can't let her do this. Our father, once the powerful and unwavering force behind the company, now looked utterly deflated. He sat there, shoulders slumped, staring at the documents I had laid out before him as if they were written in another language. He had always assumed that he was in control, that he dictated the future of this company. But now, faced with the reality that I had legally outmaneuvered him, he had nothing to say. After a long silence, he finally spoke, his voice hoarse. I never thought you would go this far, Olivia. I flinched at the use of my name, at the disappointment in his tone. Not daughter, not the leader of this company, just Olivia. I squared my shoulders. I did what I had to do, Dad. You gave him everything, without so much as consulting me. You didn't even consider whether Eric was qualified or capable. You simply assumed that I would step aside. I leaned forward, my voice turning sharper. You underestimated me. That was your mistake. Eric let out a bitter laugh. Oh, please. Don't act like you're some kind of underdog. You're just a control freak who can't handle losing. I arched a brow. Losing? Eric, you never had anything to begin with. You waltzed in here expecting to take my company, expecting that all the work I put in over the last 12 years meant nothing because you happened to share Dad's last name. But newsflash, last names don't run businesses. Competence does, and you have none. Eric lunged forward, and for a split second, I thought he might actually hit me. My father reached out, gripping his arm to stop him, but the rage in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't just angry. He was furious that I had ruined his carefully laid out plan. You're going to regret this, he growled. I tilted my head, unimpressed. I doubt that. Eric turned to my father once more, hoping for some last-minute intervention. But Dad remained still, his jaw clenched, his disappointment palpable. Realizing he wasn't going to get the answer he wanted, Eric let out a sharp breath. Fine, he muttered. You think you can run this place on your own? Let's see how long you last. With that, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him so hard that the walls trembled. I turned to my father. Are you going to walk out too? He exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple as if this whole ordeal had given him an unbearable headache. You really won't reconsider? My jaw tightened. No. He stood, straightening his jacket. Then I guess I have no choice. I braced myself, expecting some kind of fight, but instead, he simply nodded once and turned to leave. As he reached the door, he hesitated. You may have won this round, Olivia, he said without turning back, but you've made powerful enemies today. I let out a slow breath. Then they'd better be ready to lose. And with that, he was gone. The fallout begins. The silence that followed was deafening. I should have felt victorious. I had just outmaneuvered my father and brother, securing my position as the undisputed leader of the company. But instead, I felt an unsettling mix of emotions. I had spent years yearning for my father's approval, thinking that if I worked hard enough, if I achieved enough, he would finally see me. But now, after all this, he still saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience, a problem he hadn't been able to solve. I exhaled slowly, pushing down the emotions threatening to rise. This isn't the time for sentimentality. I had just won a battle, but the war wasn't over. My phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. A flood of emails, missed calls, and messages from executives, investors, and board members. The news had already begun to spread, and I knew exactly what was coming next. Damage control? I stood, smoothing out the fabric of my blazer, and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office. Below, the city stretched out before me, a reminder of everything I had fought for. I wasn't about to let them take it away. The boardroom showdown. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for that afternoon. My father and Eric might have been outmaneuvered, but they weren't going down quietly. They had spent years cultivating loyalty within the company, and I had no doubt they were already working the Whisper network, painting me as a power-hungry traitor. As I stepped into the boardroom, I immediately felt the weight of a dozen scrutinizing gazes. Some looked at me with curiosity, some with outright hostility. I took my seat at the head of the table, the seat of power, and folded my hands in front of me. "Let's not waste time," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I know there have been conversations happening behind closed doors. Some of you are questioning my leadership. Some of you may have even been approached with certain incentives to push me out." A few board members shifted uncomfortably. I let my gaze sweep across the room. "If anyone here has doubts about my ability to lead, this is the time to speak." Silence. I continued, "Let's be clear. This isn't about my father's legacy. It's about the future of this company. I built this empire. I know its strengths, its weaknesses, and most importantly, I know how to keep it thriving." I let the words sink in before delivering the final blow. My father and brother assumed that bloodline was more important than competence. That's why they failed. I sat back. "And if any of you share that belief, you're welcome to leave." The room was silent. And then, one by one, the board members nodded. The battle wasn't over, but I had just secured my reign. The game had just begun.
The boardroom was mine. I had secured my position, eliminated my brother as a threat, and forced my father into the shadows. But if I thought the battle was over, I was dead wrong. I knew my father wouldn't disappear quietly. He had built Harper & Co. from the ground up, and despite everything, he still saw it as his company, not mine.
The morning after the emergency board meeting, I walked into my office expecting another day of strategizing and crisis management. Instead, I was met with an email from legal, urge, engent. Indeed. Subject, possible external interference, immediate review required. I skimmed the contents, my heart hammering. My father had filed a formal request with the board, claiming that my leadership was detrimental to the company's long-term financial stability. He had pulled every string he had left, rallying a small but vocal group of investors to push for an independent audit of my leadership decisions. If he could convince them that I was reckless, that I was driving the company toward instability, he might still have a chance to force me out. I clenched my fists, swallowing my anger. "So this is your next move, Dad? You lost the battle, so now you're trying to win the war?" Fine. If he wanted a war, he would get one. I grabbed my phone and dialed Charlotte, my most trusted advisor and the company's head of PR. "We have a problem," I said the second she answered. "I saw the email," she responded, already a step ahead of me. "Your father's making a last-ditch effort to undermine your leadership." "I won't let him." "I know," she said, voice steady. "But we need to control the narrative. If this gets out before we've shaped the messaging, it could spook the board, and worse, it could shake investor confidence." I exhaled sharply. My father knew exactly what he was doing. Even whispers of an internal power struggle could send shockwaves through the company. Investors hated instability. If enough of them started doubting my leadership, it wouldn't matter how legally sound my position was. I could be forced to step down. "Not happening." "I want a press release out by the end of the day," I told Charlotte. "We spin this as a routine financial review, a sign of our commitment to transparency and efficiency." Charlotte was already nodding on the other end. "I'll get it drafted. And Olivia, you should prepare for the possibility that he'll go even further." I knew what she meant. My father had built his empire on powerful connections. If this didn't work, he wouldn't stop at legal maneuvers. He would use back channels, favors, and quiet conversations in smoky boardrooms to undermine me in ways I couldn't counter directly. I ended the call and sat in silence for a long moment, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office. The city stretched before me, a reminder of why I fought so hard for this. I wasn't just protecting a company, I was protecting my legacy. And I wasn't about to let anyone take that away from me. A sudden betrayal. That afternoon, I received a phone call that made my blood run cold. It was Paul, our CFO, one of the few people I had trusted in this fight. "You need to come to my office," he said, his voice tight. "Who am I?" He hesitated. It's about the audit. And the numbers. I froze. What about the numbers? Another pause. Then, carefully, they don't look good, Olivia. I was on my feet before he finished speaking. 15 minutes later, I was sitting in Paul's office, staring at a set of financial documents that made no sense. According to the numbers in front of me, Harper & Co.'s financial health had deteriorated significantly in the past 3 months. Revenue declines, expense surges, red flags everywhere. If these numbers were accurate, they would confirm my father's accusations. The board would turn against me in an instant. But I knew these numbers were wrong. This is impossible, I said, shaking my head. We've had one of our strongest quarters yet. These numbers don't add up. Paul's expression was grim. They do, Olivia. These figures come straight from the internal reports. I narrowed my eyes. Then someone tampered with them. I grabbed the reports, scanning them for inconsistencies, and that's when I saw it. A pattern of suspicious adjustments. Certain accounts had been inflated, others deflated. On paper, it looked like Harper & Co. was hemorrhaging money, but in reality, the money had been redirected. I felt my stomach turn. This was deliberate, I said softly. Someone inside the company is working against me. Paul looked at me warily. I didn't want to say anything until I was sure, but I think your father might have had help. My breath hitched. From who? Paul hesitated, then slid a second document across the desk. A list of transactions linked to an unauthorized fund movement. I scanned the names, employees, department heads, until my eyes landed on one I never expected. Charlotte. My throat went dry. It's impossible, I whispered. She's been with me from the beginning. Paul looked at me, sympathy in his eyes. I thought so too. I felt a cold, creeping betrayal sink into my bones. Charlotte, my closest ally, the woman I trusted more than anyone. Had she been feeding my father information, sabotaging me from the inside? I gritted my teeth. I would not break now. Get it to pull every email, every financial record linked to Charlotte, I said. I want proof. Paul nodded. And if you get it? I met his gaze, my voice steely. Then I make her pay. The confrontation. That evening, I asked Charlotte to meet me in my office. She walked in, looking completely unfazed. Olivia, she greeted, as if nothing was wrong. I didn't waste time. I pulled the document from my desk and slid it toward her. Explain this. Charlotte glanced at the paper, and for just a second, I saw something flicker in her expression. But then, she smirked. I guess you finally figured it out, she said. I stared at her, trying to comprehend how deep this betrayal ran. How long? I asked, my voice quiet. How long have I been working with your father? She tilted her head. 6 months, give or take. I clenched my fists. You fed him everything. Every move I made. She shrugged. He made a better offer. My vision blurred with rage. You're fired, I said coldly. Charlotte let out a soft laugh. I figured that was coming. I stood. And I will expose you. Every single fraudulent transaction you made will be brought to light. Charlotte's smirk didn't falter. You think I didn't cover my tracks? She stepped closer, lowering her voice. You may have won a few battles, Olivia, but you're about to lose the war. I met her gaze. We'll see about that. She turned and walked out, leaving me alone in the quiet, raging storm of my own office. I inhaled sharply. My father thought he could break me. He thought he could turn the people closest to me against me. But he had underestimated me before, and he was about to do it again. His fight wasn't over. Not even close. The city skyline loomed outside my office window, a battlefield in the war my father had started. The walls of Harper & Co. no longer felt like home, but like a fortress under siege. I had spent the last 12 years making this company stronger, smarter, untouchable. Yet here I was, standing at the edge of a knife, fighting to keep what was mine. Charlotte's betrayal was a gut punch, but I refused to let it stagger me. My father had thrown everything at me, manipulation, deception, and now corporate sabotage. But he made one fatal mistake. He thought I was the same woman I had been when this fight started. He thought I was still looking for his approval. He thought he could control me. He was wrong. I turned away from the window and picked up the phone, my grip tight around the receiver. "Call," I said when he answered. "Call legal. We're going on the offensive." Exposing the betrayal. The next morning I stood in Harper & Co.'s executive conference room, the same room where my father had once tried to cast me aside. This time, I was in control. I looked around the table at my executive team, some wary, some loyal, and some still undecided. They had heard the rumors. They knew a war was being fought, but they didn't know who would win. Time to show them. I took a deep breath. As most of you are aware, an internal audit was initiated at the request of certain investors. I paused, letting my words settle in. But what you don't know is that the audit uncovered evidence of fraud. Gasps echoed around the table. Unauthorized transactions. Manipulated financial reports. My eyes locked on each executive, daring them to challenge me. Someone inside this company has been working against us. Against me. I clicked a button on the remote in my hand and the screen behind me lit up with Charlotte's name. Her signature was plastered across doctored documents, hidden fund movements, and confidential emails to my father. The room erupted in whispers. "Charlotte has been actively undermining Harper & Co.," I continued, my voice unwavering. "She leaked information to my father, assisted in financial deception, and conspired to stage a corporate coup." I turned to security, who was waiting by the door. "Effective immediately, she is terminated and will be investigated for corporate fraud." The doors burst open, and Charlotte walked in, looking as calm as ever. "Olivia," she said smoothly, as if we were simply discussing a marketing strategy. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. "Security," I said. 2 guards flanked her instantly. Her smirk faltered. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice tight. "No," I said coolly. "You did, Charlotte. You bet against me and you lost." She opened her mouth as if to argue, but security was already leading her out. The silence in the room was deafening. I turned back to my executives. "This company will not be torn apart by internal corruption. My father may have started this war, but I will finish it." I took my seat at the head of the table. "Now," I said, leveling my gaze. "Let's get back to work." The final blow. With Charlotte gone, my father had no more insiders to fight his battle. But he still had influence. The following week, news outlets started reporting on the Harper family feud. Anonymous sources, likely my father's allies, painted me as a ruthless daughter who betrayed her own blood for power. Investors started to hesitate. Stock prices dipped. It was a calculated move, but I was ready. The next morning, I called an emergency press conference. Cameras flashed as I took my place at the podium. I knew every investor, every employee, every potential ally or enemy was watching. "My father built Harper & Co. from the ground up," I began. "And for that, he deserves respect. But let me be clear, this company is not his anymore." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. For years, I dedicated my life to ensuring Harper & Co. not only survived but thrived. And for years I fought against outdated leadership that refused to adapt. I let my words sink in before continuing. Recently, I uncovered evidence of fraud and corporate espionage within this company. My father's supporters attempted to manipulate financial records to sabotage my leadership. A hush fell over the room. They have turned over every piece of evidence to the authorities, and legal proceedings have already begun. My father had tried to weaponize public perception against me. Now, I was using cold, hard facts against him. This company will not be controlled by deception, by nepotism, or by those who believe they are entitled to power they have not earned. I looked straight into the cameras. Harper & Co. belongs to those who built it, those who bled for it, those who sacrificed for it. And I will not allow it to be stolen. I stepped away from the podium, ignoring the flurry of questions shouted my way. The message had been sent. A legacy secured. That evening, my father called me. I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. "Olivia," he said. "You lost," I replied. A pause, then a sigh. "You went further than I expected. You underestimated me," I said simply. Silence. "You know," he finally said, I never wanted it to end like this. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Yes, you did. You just didn't think you'd lose. A beat of silence. Then, softly, "Are you happy?" I didn't answer. Instead, I said, "Stay away from Harper & Co. If you push this any further, I will make sure you regret it." Another pause, then, finally, "Goodbye, Olivia." The line went dead. I exhaled slowly, staring at the city's skyline. I had won, but at what cost? My father was gone. My brother was long out of the picture. My family had been shattered, burned to the ground in the battle for control. But this company, my company, was stronger than ever. And if securing my legacy meant losing them forever, so be it. If you've made it this far, you've seen the battle, the betrayals, and the ruthless game of power unfold. But trust me, the story isn't over yet. What happens next will change everything. Olivia may have won this round, but victory comes with a price, and not all enemies strike from the front. There are still secrets left to be uncovered, alliances to be tested, and one final move that will determine whether she truly owns Harper & Co., or if the past will come back to take everything from her. What do you think will happen next? Will Olivia hold her ground, or will the weight of her decisions catch up with her? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I love reading your predictions, and your support keeps these stories alive. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit that like button. Every thumbs up helps spread this story to more viewers who love a good power struggle. And if you want to be the first to know when the next part drops, subscribe to Betrayal and the End and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Because in the world of power and revenge, no one is ever truly safe.